10 questions atheists cannot answer. Yeah, they can't answer, okay? What you're really saying is they don't answer to your satisfaction because what you want is absolute proof you're wrong. You know, it's just so stupid. The like to dislike 10, 177, it's just absolutely telling to me, that, and the comments are disabled as well. What does that really say? Like, oh, they can't answer questions, and you disable comments for anyone who tries, It's so stupid. You just want to put your narcissistic ideas out there and then not have them scrutinized and challenged. What's the point of that?
Do you really believe that science is the only answer to all of life's questions?
No one said that science had all the answers. Is science the answer to things? Science is about inquiry, so yes, it is the way to answer questions. Um, it's not to say it's ever going to have, everything we could ever want, but it's always going to be able to provide the mechanism for which we'll be able to get more stuff. So, in a way, it's sort of an infinity because while we'll never reach a point where we stop and then we have it all, the fact that we can always get more, probably anyway, means we'll always be improving. So that's a good thing. So your presumption that these questions cannot be answered, rather than the typical that they have to answer in order to justify their so-called faith, which is already stupid. But this is just taking it one step further and is extremely arrogant and really dumb. Okay.
If God doesn't exist, why do you care if people worship him?
I don't think atheists care if people worship God in itself, but that's not enough for Christians. That's not enough for the religious. They have to take children and induct them into the cult, and people don't like that. They have to have so much influence over our society, and people don't like that. Um, People don't like stupidity. It sort of makes them uncomfortable. Like they make fun of it, yes, but it's just something that can infuriate. It makes people have a hard time maintaining a sense of calmness. So it's not about you pray or whatever you worship. It's the idea that we're all disgusting and your self-deprecation is gross, and you're basically saying our species is disgusting, which I don't like. Obviously, I'm not saying I disagree, but I disagree for different reasons. I agree that the species is quite gross, but the reason is actually because of people like you, and stupidity and maliciousness. Whereas you're basically positing that people who aren't religious are the problem, and I think that's absurd.
Seriously, can nothing create something? If you
Can nothing create something? Well, we don't really necessarily have a firm grasp on what nothing is. Can nothing create something? It's unknown, really, but there's no evidence there was ever nothing anyway, so it's kind of meaningless. But can God just exist? Can God come into being out of nothing? Is that not nothing creating something? God didn't create himself because if he didn't always exist, then he can't have created himself since there was a time he wasn't in existence to be able to do it. And if he simply always did exist, then why can't the universe simply always existed? So, it doesn't really answer the question. It just redirects the source. It's stupid.
you've never been to the ends of the earth, if you've never been to every planet, if you've never been to every part of the universe, how do you know that God doesn't exist?
Um, I don't like the bullet in a loaded gun mentality of this question, like the smugness of your face. It's bullshit. You know, no atheist is gonna say that they know God doesn't exist, not because they're atheist. That would be because they're Gnostic. Okay, if they believe that they know that, that's arrogant and stupid. If you look at intelligent people, and you really ask them, they act like there's no God, but if you really ask them, do they know that? They'll say no. They have humility. They just don't think it's likely, and there's no evidence for it, and it's absurd, and it's very obviously of human design, um, and it's sort of outdated relic. So it's just gross and stupid and wrong. And even if there was a God, it certainly wouldn't prove yours. There's no evidence for yours. And there's not even really evidence for any God. So the fact there's no evidence means a neutral position is the rational place to be. Your faith is a disease and it's infectious and it leads to conflicts unnecessarily and it's bad. Um, and it's just stupid and it holds us all back as a society. So that's enough of a reason to want nothing to do with it.
What is the origin of life?
Um, the origin of life is a mystery. We know aspects, but we don't know everything about that. We could trace it back to single-celled organisms and stuff, but where did that originate? There's theories about that, but it's not conclusive. There's no verified as a sort of an accepted thing in science, but that doesn't mean that we don't know. Therefore, it lends to God did it, at all. This is a fair question, but I don't like the association of this question, the attachment to it, and you people are so unoriginal with your questions. It sort of makes these videos kind of pointless because I'm just repeating myself in the same way that you're repeating yourselves.
If humans are animals, then where does our sense of justice, where does our sense of morality, where does our sense of what's right and what's wrong come from?
More of this person who does not understand that humans have empathy as a social species. We care because it's in our nature to care. Because of biology, and um, there's also social pressuring and conformist mentality. You're raised in a society with values, so you adopt those values, and you're raised to believe it, and you do because that's just how indoctrination works, and it's not related to just religion. If you're raised to believe from authority figures that you respect and love what right and wrong is, then it'll be instilled in you, and you'll now believe it, and it's so ingrained into your being that you even if you break them, you break your rules, you'll feel bad about it. That's just how human beings work. It's not really that hard of a question to answer, and I don't really like the implication that morality comes from God anyway. For reasons that have been explained, namely, it's permissible to do evil, and that it's a relic and it's outdated, and we can't improve what we consider to be right and wrong. The fact that it's subjective is helpful because we can make it better by making our subjective more reasonable instead of just making permissible absolutes.
If you were given irrefutable evidence that the God of the Bible is real, would you become a Christian?
I don't really know what that means. Would I become a Christian? I would, if being a Christian means recognizing Jesus, then I would be a Christian. If it was truly irrefutable, sure. But if it means worshiping, I wouldn't necessarily do that. And if it means accepting Jesus into my heart, I wouldn't necessarily do that. And even if I did, it would only be done out of fear or sway. If I'm rational, I would have to look at it as regretful that I would, be so swayed by emotionality or hive mind mentality. I don't know what I would do because it's an unknown, but whatever I would do would not necessarily reflect what would be right to do. So it really doesn't matter what I would do.
Tell me something. If evolution is real, transitional forms that we can observe.
What does that even mean? There are no transitional forms. Um, Anytime we look at a creature that has two different states of being, essentially a subspecies, a further progression, we can see that incremental change, in the fossil record, which is imperfect, but it's still very clear. Um, and in fruit flies, um, we see their changes, their mutations in generations. So it's obviously not a true premise. So you're positing this question as a factual statement, and then asking the reason for that fact, but it's not a true fact. So it's a meaningless question.
Do you live according to what you believe, or do you live your life according to what you lack?
Well, I don't live my life according to what I lack in belief. The same way I don't live my life, lacking a belief in fairies. I live my life not so much with according to what I believe, but what according to what I think is reasonable, and what I think works for me, and what I enjoy and like, and I think is right. For me, I do what I decide and what is permissible, in what I can justify to myself. And I live in a society, and I obey the rules. Um, Mostly because I don't really have any interest in being a bad person. And in some cases, maybe just out of convenience. But obviously, I don't live my life with a lack of belief as like my foundation. My foundation is reason and skepticism, empiricism, logic, rationality, fairness. That's where the lack of belief comes from, because I cannot justify belief. But it's those other things that are my foundation, not the lack of belief.
In belief, if God doesn't exist and the Christian dies, the Christian loses nothing.
Is this really Pascal's wager?
But if God does exist and you die as an atheist, do you not lose more?
What do I lose? Okay, the implication being what? That God is such a petty asshole that I didn't believe him, I wasn't gullible enough, which is what he made me to not be in the first place. So I deserve to burn for that, I deserve to be suffering, because God is so petty and vindictive. Um, it's stupid. I don't. You're saying the question's posed as if God exists, will you not lose your soul when you die? Well, I don't believe in a literal soul. I may use the word sometimes poetically, but it just refers to emotion, and a sort of um, place inside that is sort of my humanity, and the way that I feel deep down. Like, I don't believe in a literal thing inside me that transcends my physical being. Okay, it's just nonsense. So do I lose anything if I die? What do I lose? If it's all true, it seems like I would gain something. I would gain a negative thing, but um, the ridiculousness of that, the silliness of that, plus the absolute evil of that. What is there to be like? Why is this posed in sort of like a "you've got it coming" kind of way? It seems kind of rapey to me. It's like um, he put the knife to her throat and he said, "Stop resisting, bitch, or I'll kill you and I'll rape you." And then she didn't stop squirming because it's natural for her. And then he slits her throat or whatever, and he's all like, "You had this coming." Is that really right? If you're forced to do something under duress, does that make it even valid in the first place? Even if she didn't resist, I mean, it's just meaningless.
Will you not lose your soul? Hebrews chapter 11 verse 3 says, by faith we understand that the
I really hate these Bible quoters. It's basically, to me, is just saying the Bible says it, so I believe it. But you haven't validated the source, so therefore whatever it says doesn't matter. It'd be like reading an outdated science textbook. and just saying that it makes sense, um, or something that's outdated and just we know is not true anymore. It's got old information, and we have new information. So we if we discredit the source, whatever it says really doesn't matter. And without a verified source that is current and up to date and actually accurate, whatever it says is just propaganda, basically. In the case of a religion, and in the case of science, would just be outdated information because it was never being peddled for any kind of like false pretense. It would be sharing what was thought to be known at the time. That's far more noble than twisting shit and making people submit. But I'll sort of humor you anyway.
Verse was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible.
By faith, let's like in depth break that down. By faith, we understand. That's a faulty premise right off the bat. By faith, you cannot understand anything because it's faith. And understanding requires reason and knowledge and evidence. So you can't understand based on faith. That the universe was created by the word of God. And the universe is all, right? So if that was created by God, that means that God existed at a time essentially with a physical nothing, right? Maybe he existed in heaven, but there was nothing outside of heaven. And that just sort of begs the question, where did heaven come from? And if he created that too, then there must have been a time or whatever where God existed in nothing, and what is that? How is that really satisfying? What does that even mean? So that what is seen was not made of things that are visible.
Now, just because we can't visibly see something, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
It doesn't mean it does exist. Obviously, the fact that you can't disprove something isn't a reason to believe it. You know, you can't disprove lots of things. And the people all sound the same when they say this. They always reference, including me, just leprechauns and fairies and unicorns and um, I'm just gonna say dragons because I don't hear that one very much. Just because you can't disprove something does not mean that there's any reason to believe in it.
We cannot see God, but it doesn't mean that God doesn't exist.
Of course, it doesn't mean that. That doesn't mean that it should be believed, though.
For example, we cannot see the wind, but
We can feel the fucking wind. This is not an apt comparison because we don't feel God.
do feel the wind. We also feel the effects of the wind, and we also experience the movement of the wind. And so the truth is, creation itself testifies of an all-powerful and
No, it doesn't. This is just a baseless assertion, you asshole.
imaginative creator. And so to the atheist, I would encourage you to be open-minded.
Perfectly reasonable. But your idea of open-minded is heavily swaying to your side. And trying not to like dismiss what you're saying as idiocy, which it is. If you want to believe something, there's no more or less valid reason to worship at the shrine of dragons. Okay, if you would see that, what would you call that? And who are you open-minded if you look at somebody, if you look at some moronic fuck who worships dragons at the Church of Dragons, are you gonna say that person is just as valid as you, or are you going to be closed-minded against it? Are you going to look at it and think it's fucking insane? Because I know what you're going to do. You're going to think it's fucking stupid. And it's not even like a straw man reduction. The reality is you have no more evidence for God than dragons. And therefore it's perfectly apt and comparable to say if somebody worshipped dragons. The only difference is that a lot of people don't do it. And in your case, a lot of people do. So therefore, it's the sway mentality, but that doesn't make it valid. So if you looked at it and said, well, obviously, blah, blah, no, nothing. You know, the fact that people believe what you believe doesn't make it valid. You know, it just makes you gullible and stupid.
to the existence of God and to the possibilities of having a relationship with your Creator. Amen.
A relationship with your creator. Amen. I hate this faith shit, okay? Because not if it was like one religion in the whole world that ever existed and people believed it, I could kind of understand the appeal of faith. I could. It would sort of make some sort of sense to me, but the reality is these faiths are contradictory, and there's no reason to believe in one of them in particular. If there was just one faith, it would be a coin toss in a way, you know. But there's so many different types, and they can't all be right, and there's no valid reason to go from one to the other. And you start realizing just how insane people are and how arrogant they really are, you know, to believe that they're right, as opposed to a rational person that just sort of stands in the neutral position of rational thinking. You know, you look at that and you see how stupid it really is because there's so many different types. And I'm glad there is in a way because it just shows how absurd this whole really is, and it would be really hard to resist it if it was the only one. Well, that's it. Annoying ass outro music. Hopefully these people, well, actually, I really don't give a shit if these people want to come to the side of reason. But I hope people listening who are on the fence can come to the side of reason, and it's not arrogant to call it that. If you have a reason that makes sense as to why the other side is valid, I'd be very glad to hear that. Um, Not because I want there to be a God, because I really don't, but I want the truth, and I have not been satisfied by anything Christians say. So if you have some sort of argument that actually can hold up to real reasonable scrutiny and make sense, fine, you know. But if you're just gonna spout all this stupid bullshit and make these false statements on what people cannot answer, like the truth is, people can answer any question, any question. It doesn't mean it's the truth. It doesn't mean it's the correct answer. But to pose that they can't answer this is faulty as a premise. You know, so it's just bullshit. And I'm done.